Hello, and welcome to the Why We Argue podcast. I am Robert Talese, your host. I'm professor of philosophy at Vanderbilt University. Why We Argue is produced by Humility and Conviction in Public Life, a project based at the University of Connecticut, which explores how to balance our deepest commitments with open-mindedness, a respect for reasons, and intellectual humility. The series, which is made possible by generous funding from the John Templeton Foundation, features brief discussions with publicly minded thinkers about the state of civil discourse in contemporary democracy. Today, my guest is Thom Brooks. Thom is head of Durham Law School, professor of law and government, and associate in the Department of Philosophy in the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University. His academic work is focused largely on issues in ethics, criminal law, and public policy, but he's widely known as a critic of the UK Citizenship Test. His most recent book is about this, and it's titled Becoming British, UK Citizenship Examined. Hi, Thom.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. Great to talk to you.
Great talking to you. Now, let's get right to it. Thom, as listeners may have already detected, you are American by birth, and you have recently acquired UK citizenship. Now, I know you've been paying very close attention to the political scene, both in the U.S. and in the U.K. It seems to me that both countries are in the midst of some kind of political reorientation. That's one way to put it, I think. And it seems that longstanding norms regarding civil discourse, regarding political speech, and maybe longstanding categorizations of political views and allegiances seem all to be giving way. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that there certainly are some parallels broadly between the election of Donald Trump in my native United States and in the so-called Brexit referendum here in the United Kingdom. Though I also wouldn't make too much of some of these similarities. I think that one thing that seems to be true as the dust still settles on both results and people still try to figure out how expectations about what the results would be went so wrong. Both results were not widely predicted, certainly not much in advance of either event. Seems that one of the things that's going on for both is that there's a sizable number of people who feel to some degree dispossessed is probably too strong, but alienated probably isn't. This problem of alienation from what difference does the result really mean for me? So one of the surprising things from many of the American commentators I was following, watching Trump's rise to the White House was, there'd be a number of comments made that seemed to lack evidence or lack support, and a lot of criticism of what he was arguing for and his means of making it happen, and yet the support seemed to remain untouched, unfazed by some of this. And what explains some of that? Well, some of it was a kind of it would seem, a real distrust of mainstream media, mainstream reporting, life as usual, politics as usual. And I think something fairly similar happened in the United Kingdom with the vote to leave the European Union. By turning attention to the UK, here, by almost every account, Britain has been part for over 40 years in this developing close entanglement with European Union institutions. That's a lot more than just about trade, although the European Union is Britain's largest trading bloc. It's about security arrangements and refugee arrangements and a variety of other ties that really are fairly comprehensive. And what you saw were scenes the day of the vote of jubilation of crowds, such as not too far from me here in Durham city of Sunderland, where the first to report their result, and was a resounding vote to leave the European Union. And it was very puzzling that you had a city where the number one employer was a company, a European branch of a company that was making cars to sell in Europe. And this irony of, well, why are they celebrating ending or possibly limiting, damaging their biggest local employer? Do they hate what they do, or how could this be? And I think what was really going on is people just didn't think, one, there would be any negative consequence from the vote. So I think alienation was a very deep running thing here, and this real interest in a sense sticking it to the powers that be, the politics as usual. I said at the beginning, I don't think I'd make too strong a connection between these events, because we've had in Britain we've had what are called by-elections. There's been a couple members of Parliament that have stepped down to take other jobs. Both of them happen to be from the Labour Party, which is in opposition in this country, and in both those seats, things in the contest for them, things went back pretty much to politics as usual. The big party that has been driving the whole independence from Europe for many years, called UKIP, the UK Independence Party, absolutely nosedived in these by-elections, and it included their new leader who took over from Nigel Farage, made a real show for it in one of the seats that was really primed to deliver UKIP's second member of Parliament, and he just bombed and had a humiliating finish, and UKIP didn't even really show in the other election. And so to some degree this rejection of the establishment, elites, etc., and so forth hasn't, I don't think, really kind of taken off in Britain. The Tories the Conservative Party are very much the governing party. That hasn't changed. They've been in place now since 2010 broadly in power, and that doesn't seem to be too shaken by this, and it led by a Prime Minister who campaigned for Britain to remain in Europe. She seems to be stronger than ever right now, rather than weaker by this. So there's some kind of thing here about a general voters being, I think, alienated and being trying to, what's so bad about the results for me? Not really caring, it seems, too much for celebrities. It seems the more celebrities were arguing for Hillary Clinton or arguing for Britain to stay in Europe, the more people reacted negatively to that. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. But Britain, I don't know how much the winds have really changed, to be fair.
And does that seem to you to be a difference between the UK and the US, where I take it arguably, we see polls about Trump's popularity and approval and all of this, any polling that shows any waning, or in fact any unpopularity, is dismissed, of course, as fake or trumped up. As fake. But it doesn't look like the support among those who supported him has waned very much. Or do you think I'm wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that. And that seems right. Shifting a little bit then to kind of a comparison over here, there's been, a strong support for Britain leaving the European Union. In the run-up to the poll, Remain was always in the lead, but the lead wasn't huge. Certainly wasn't for the months leading up to the election itself, and it was a narrow win, 52 to 48 for leaving. And so I think, not a world away. And at the moment, a lot of the feelings of the public when they've done polls, do they want a second referendum right now? People think, well, what's really changed? The sky hasn't fallen. Of course, Britain hasn't actually left.
Right.
So any of the negative effects haven't unfolded. Where the difference is now going back to America, Trump did become president, and now there's a chance to see in action whether or not he's able to achieve a lot of the things he said he would. And, he claimed he was going to have all the best people doing all the best things and all the rest of it, and has already had one member of his cabinet leave within a couple of weeks,
right.
And so on. And so there's already, it seems, even the most ardent supporter has to admit it hasn't been the most seamless transition. Things are not up and running as they would be normally. They might well blame other forces for how it's reported or what's going on, but certainly has been a difficult few weeks for the Trump administration. And it seems that some of the support has, I think, eroded a bit for them. Whereas over here, the Brexit thing hasn't really happened. You've got a government, there hasn't been a general election. You have a government that was for remaining. Prime Minister is a new Prime Minister than the one who led us into it, but was on the side of remaining. Her position isn't threatened at all, certainly not from within her party. And the Tories won a seat from Labour in what was normally a safe Labour seat, but the UKIP, which was the big upstarts, the big shaking things up, the identifying with Trump, Nigel Farage and Trump, representing certain a new alt-right resurgency and so on, has just nosedived. And I think at the moment, UKIP they have only one of 650 members of Parliament. They weren't able to increase it at all. And I just think that they're not something to worry a whole lot about. There is something to worry about for any politician, about folks who feel alienated and that their elected representatives don't act in their interest. They don't do enough to respond to the interests of people on the ground at a time where in Britain the economy is sluggish and the currency has nosedived in the wake of Brexit. It's fallen fairly dramatically since the vote in June last year. And so I think that's a concern for people, but that concern about where the country is going has not translated to, as far as I can tell, a permanent shift away from any of the other from the mainstream politics. It's true, by way of just trying to be complete about it. On the Labour Party, they do have the most left-wing leader the party's had in some time, and I advise the Labour Party on immigration policy, but I've done so before the leader took over, and the leader took over before any of this kind of stuff was really kicking off. So I think that even there, hasn't been any kind of big shift there either. It remains to be seen. There may well be something, but it isn't obvious yet.
Well, so let me pick up on that, because it does seem that one of the ways in which the political scenes on both sides of the pond, as it were, are connected is they seem both, at least largely, not completely, but largely, concerned with issues about immigration. Does that seem right? And it looked as if that was a big part of the case for Brexit, that
yes.
Immigration is this colossal problem. The standing governments, the standing parties, as long as they're tied to the European Union, aren't going to be able to address it or take it seriously. On the U.S. side, pretty much the same kind of narrative that neither the sort of politics as usual, none of the politics as usual players in either the Republican or the Democratic parties had any real incentive to address immigration, and none of them were going to be tough enough about immigration or willing to recognize the problems that immigrants pose for the country. Now, as an immigrant,
Yes, indeed. That's right.
What do you make of that?
Wow. Yeah. No. That's absolutely right. I think. Well, my view is perhaps against some of the conventional wisdom. I think it's absolutely true that immigration was a big part of the Trump campaign. That he was going to be tough in a way that we'll for want of a better phrase, the mainstream Republicans were not, at least in his eyes, and the Democrats were not in his view, and you had something similar in the UK, and I'll come to the UK second. In the United States, it's a curious. So where I think I depart from the mainstream is I think it wasn't so much an anti-immigration thing that he was really writing on. It was an anti-immigration of certain people that he was writing with, some immigrants and not others. You have a man who's president who is the son of an immigrant from Scotland. His mother was a Scot from, I think, the Highlands. His two of his three wives, I think, have been immigrants themselves, naturalized American later. His children are, many of his children are, in a sense, first generation, at least on their mother's side, American citizens. And none of this was an issue, certainly, for him. He didn't feel, and kind of standing, we need to slow down immigration. It wasn't about, we need to prevent people like me and my family coming to America and being here and owning Trump Tower and other kinds of things. No, I think that the anti-immigration view that he would kind of espouse standing next to his immigrant wife from Eastern Europe was, had a subcontext. It had, that they were, I don't want to call it the deserving and the undeserving immigrant, but it was something along those lines. We need to have a border, but the border's not on Canada.
Right.
We need to have a travel ban, but not on everyone. And curiously, he's reformulated it now. During the campaign, there was talk of a Muslim ban. There's been many steps away from at least saying that that's what he's doing now. But curiously, the biggest Muslim countries in the world, or the countries that have the most Muslims in the world, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, curiously not on these lists. It's folks who come from other Muslim majority countries that are the target. So I think that have a different culture, come from a different part of the world than Asia, and some other places. And that's a fascinating subtext. So
right.
There's this anti-immigration stuff. I think it's not anti-immigration against all immigrants, because he's not against all immigrants. He's always, when he's in Scotland talking about his golf course and campaigning against having wind farms that the Scottish government has been keen to allow against his wishes near his golf courses, he talks about how he's a proud son of Scotland. And this Make America Great stuff is, well, he leaves that behind in New York. He's a born again Scot when he's over here.
It's interesting, and I take it that even the new version of the travel ban, sort of identifies travelers from Muslim majority countries, but those countries that are identified isn't tracking any particular metric about terrorism or national security or
anything. That's right. That's right. And that was part of his problem in the court, that there were two, it seemed, particular concerns. One was that it was a blanket, he had some kind of blanket bans based on nationality that was unconstitutional. And so Syrian refugees were going to be banned vis-a-vis their being Syrian forever under the original version. And the other problem was he had no rationale for why those countries and not others. He's now claiming the FBI has investigations open into about 300 people come from these countries on this particular list, which no longer has Iraq. But, are they looking at people from other countries? Are they more or less?
Right.
People under suspicion aren't criminals. And he claims he's being wiretapped by the FBI. So if we're worried about FBI investigations, and people who are under investigation shouldn't be in America. Well, he thinks he should be in the White House.
Well, so let me ask. let me.
I had to drop that in.
Let me shift gears very, maybe subtly, maybe not. Let me shift gears in any case. What do you think the political implications are? Let's say that the kind of analysis you offered a moment ago about the election results, both the Brexit result and the U.S. presidential election result. Let's stipulate that you're correct, that this is a kind of populist reaction that has more of a kick the bastards out or shake things up messaging to it, rather than any overt, well-studied support of the policies. That there was a kind of knee-jerk, and maybe not badly motivated, but just sort of an attempt to just shake things up in the politics. Now, on the one hand, maybe one could say that an occasional election or, large-scale government decision that's driven by that kind of motive might not be such a terrible thing every now and again. On the other hand, I guess it looks like it could also be very dangerous in that the drain the swamp sort of thought winds up with a government of people who might not know what they're doing.
No, that's absolutely right. So, one of the comments about this topic in a way that I'm reminded of is by my fellow Connecticut Yankee, Ralph Nader, from I think West Hartford, Connecticut. When Ralph Nader was running as the Green Party candidate, though curiously, I don't think ever a member of the Green Party himself, when he was running against Al Gore and Bush in that famous election, he said, look, it's a tight race. If you drop out, there's a better chance that Gore might pass the finish line. But you being involved could take votes away, and this is a bad thing because, if you are this kind of left-wing Green Party guy, then the joke is of some Green Party candidates that they're green on the outside and red on the inside, or at least some version of pink, then, you're kind of harming the left-wing cause in Katrinius. And his line was, that I remember him saying, was, well, it's important for, if Gore doesn't win, in a sense that's his fault, having someone like Bush, George W. Bush as president could be very useful at reminding us why it's so important for the left to organize and be involved and be committed in politics. They'll see that the political reality, it isn't just the same whichever side you go to. There ought to be a difference and all this kind of stuff. And I suppose that I take the point that there can be something enormously damaging if potentially, if you've got folks taking over who don't know what they're doing and then do a very bad job of it because of if for no other reason, then the widespread damaging long-term effects on many people if they don't get things right, whatever getting things right might mean. I do think with both elections, one thing I also think is, it's the case that the polls seemed right, that Hillary Clinton was more popular across the country with voters than Trump. It just seems that more of her supporters didn't feel as strongly about voting for her as some of Trump's supporters felt for him, and that his core was maybe smaller than hers, but they turned up, and hers didn't. And if more of the country turned out to vote, we'd have a different result. Certainly with Brexit, it was the case that the vote in the cities were down. If the city vote was up, then we would have had a different result. It wasn't much of a difference between the two sides, only a few percent. And so I think that you have two results that were fairly close, and they're seismic, and we'll be talking about them forever. And they could represent, because of the potential, the Brexit potential consequence is massive for the UK. It's potentially massive for the United States in losing a very long-term ally. If America is looking for its ally in the European Union, a country that speaks English, it'll be looking to the Republic of Ireland instead of Britain. Britain is no longer going to be at the table if everything is followed through, and that will have serious consequences, negative consequences, I think, for Britain. On the other side, Trump's politics, undoubtedly, if he gets his way, whatever one's views are, if you support him, if you don't, he represents something different from other parties, and if he has some success in seeing through his agenda, it'll inevitably have massive consequences, and will take many years to change. And so, these elections do matter. They're not just kind of wished away, and it's important that you have the right people in the right spots who know to some degree what they're doing. I dare say one thing I like more about one thing I potentially like more about the British system is it does have at least formally, a non-partisan civil service that does most of the grafting. There is not a lot of political appointments at all when governments change hands. You have the same people who are there on merit, who are running through bipartisan groups who find themselves advising on home affairs, on the Treasury, on defense, and so on. You do not have a cabinet of people who are appointed by some executive. You have people who are almost entirely elected themselves through election process, and so then you have, in a sense, the risks of ministers, people in cabinet not getting the right advice, whatever that advice is, not having access to, as close as you can find it, impartial evidence about certain topics. I don't think you have quite the same. Britain's got many problems politically, but I don't think you have that issue to the same degree. As I say, Britain has got lots of problems. It's also a smaller country. It might be easier to manage these kinds of things, but I think it has a more resilient, highly skilled civil service that is divorced from having any one master.
Right.
And that weathers the storm a bit better, and that is able to take people who might be new in office and upskill. And of course, it's also the case in the run-up to any election that the shadow, so the people in opposition and those in government, all sit the same set of training on how to run their departments and so on by the same groups. There's no things are all in it together, so that there is a seamless transition. And hey, at the end of the day, the Queen's still in charge.
Right. So, Thom,
that's another issue.
Yeah. So you've been very generous. Let me just ask a sort of final question. So do you think there are any lessons that we should take away, or any advice? I mean, to a lot of people, I take it, in both of our countries, there's a kind of disorienting, aspect to the political scene these days where, as I said earlier, political allegiances and the ways in which political categories that help to classify people and platforms seem to be in upheaval, and in the States at least it's not uncommon. This is not a random sampling of people at Vanderbilt University who talk to me about these things, students and otherwise, are often express some version of the thought that there's something sort of dizzying or disorienting about the last several months politically in the country. Any advice?
Well, I mean, I think that there's some degree of disorientation, in Britain with the Brexit vote, whether Europe, being part of Europe, was a good thing or a bad thing, is something that split the parties in different ways. The Tories were largely split down the middle. Labour was more Remain than Leave, but had a sizable Leave minority. Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party were both committed Remain. But you did have this division within parties. It did obviously make things more complex, and has had some twists and turns here, even if it is still, I think, the case that areas that are traditional Tory are largely remaining, that areas of traditional Labour are that there are lookings for alternatives, but that's still something that's in transition and hasn't had the big transformative moment that maybe Trump was. But coming to your main point, I'll try to answer it by turning to a philosopher, which I sometimes do. So I might be head of a law school, but I still think of myself primarily as a philosopher without shame, embarrassment, or qualification. And I turn to Hegel. So Hegel claims in his philosophy of right that the single biggest problem facing modernity is this problem of what he calls the rabble, this problem of alienation, this thought that it's not necessarily about people's material wealth, although lacking material wealth may well make a rabble likely, but it's this thought. What unifies the rabble is it's a kind of mentality, he says, a mindset, that no matter how loud my voice, no matter what my engagement or lack thereof, I make no difference, that there's a thing called the state, the community, that is run by others, for others, in their interests, almost autonomous from me. And Hegel thinks that when people have that view, this is a very kind of this kind of subversion, as it were, is a very dangerous thing for the state. Now, the thought here is not that, and therefore we should all be thinking the same thing. That's not the case. But the thought is that when we think about our rights and how we will overcome conflict and how we might work together, that there is no together. There is no connection between you and I. You are just doing your own thing, and I don't matter, and therefore I will take things into my own hands. I will act upon laws unto myself. This is a very destabilizing kind of thing. Now, some might think it's welcome in societies that maybe where the rules are bad anyway and ripe for correction, that anything is better than where they are, and so on and so forth. But as a point of principle, there's, I think that there's something to this thought of alienation as a problem. Certainly for a well-ordered society of any description. And I think that sense of alienation is one that we are seeing kind of expressed these days with a certain type of volume, on both sides of the Atlantic in different ways, loudly and clearly. It's not quite clear how politicians are going to really respond to this. My experience in America is that my representative back in New Haven for many years has never directly responded to anything I've ever written to her about, and she's been the representative for many decades. Whereas in Britain, there is a more openness and greater engagement with the academy, which is not seen, universities are not seen as ivory towers by most politicians. They're seen as friends, as great sources of evidence, to be, and to be taken for what they are. There's far greater openness here. I've spoken to politicians across all the major parties, despite my advising only one of them. Hasn't been any problem for seeing the others over the years. So a very different type of openness. And basically this question about what the parties are going to do to respond to this. I think that acting as normal won't work, as people are bowling alone even more than they might have ever bowled before. In their echo chambers on Twitter, on other social media things, where a lot of the news people might get is from the friends that they have on Facebook or Twitter alone, and they're unable or lack the time or don't value other ways of accessing information. This clearly changes the game, and without some type of if you're not going to have some kind of robust public spirit, it doesn't have to be communitarian, but some type of public engagement between citizens in one form or another, and in the absence of some kind of greater focus on civics and civic education in either of our countries, more so than what you might find here, then you're going to have this fragmentation of people kind of going into their limited echo chambers more and more, not engaging with each other because they don't have time or interest and or access to information. And whatever change we think we're seeing now is just going to become even greater in future. Perhaps some shakeup is, necessary anyway. How things are, I'm a Hegelian. How things are is not how it should be. But there's more than one way of transforming our politics into something that works better for citizens, whatever that might mean, whatever ideology people have, whatever view of the good people might have. And I think just simply shouting at each other and claiming things as true that aren't without facts and evidence, whether it be about immigration and Brexit debate or other issues with Trump's travel bans and other things, is just not the way to do it in the long term. So we all need to worry about that. The problem of alienation that troubled Hegel in the early 19th century, I think, still troubles us today.
Well, Thom, that's a wonderful advertisement for Hegel, who can always use good press, I think. So thank you for talking to us today, Thom.
Pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Why We Argue podcast, which I remind you is produced by the University of Connecticut's Humility and Conviction in Public Life project with generous support from the John Templeton Foundation. You can follow the project on Twitter and on Facebook at Public Humility. That's one word, Public Humility. Thank you so much, and bye for now.